Hi YouTube, this is Teddy Staples. I'm going to be making a video, um, mostly because I've been watching a couple of YouTubers that have been talking about their prison experience. The three main ones that I've really been watching are Lockdown 23 and 1, the After Prison Show, and Larry Lawton. And all three of them are really great YouTube shows if you haven't checked them out, and that's something that you're interested in. They actually give a really good insight on what life is like in prison. The only thing is I really haven't found too many people on YouTube that give their experiences on the juvenile system. And I was in like a juvenile maximum security prison in Wisconsin for close to 8 years. I went in when I was 14, and by the time that I did about 9 months in a few detention centers, which are the equivalent of like the juvenile county jail, pretty much. Then I did a couple months in the county jail when they were deciding whether they wanted to charge me as an adult or a juvenile, which they ended up charging me as a juvenile. So I ended up getting a term that we used in Wisconsin, which was juvenile life. So I pretty much got 10 years in juvenile. So I would, at the end of my sentence and probation, was on my 25th birthday. So I wanted to kind of go over some of the similarities and differences from what I've experienced in the juvenile system compared to what these guys and a couple of my friends that I know have sat in adult prison. And the main things that I noticed was the juvenile system where I was at. They focused primarily on like the education and getting your thinking straight, getting you out of the criminal thinking. A lot of the guys that went in there were like me, 15, 16 years old, and we didn't really have the motivation when we were in high school before we got locked up, and we were extremely far behind, and without like a basic education, they knew that, you know, they would have been setting us up for failure if they didn't at least attempt to give us a shot at getting our HSED or a GED or a high school diploma. So they focused really strongly on the education side, and the second thing that they focused a lot on was like the AODA programs or the drug programs, the anger management programs. A lot of those were good programs. I didn't agree with how some of them were set up. If somebody's got a drug problem and you force them to take a drug class or an alcohol class, I don't think it didn't do too much good. But that's just my opinion. But the education system there, we had a lot of different administration people that were running the program from outside the prison, like Department of Corrections, supervisors that came and went quite a few times in the 8 years I was there. So the policies changed quite a bit, quite a few times while I was there. And when I was there, when I first got there, they had quite a few programs for guys that were already done with their HSED or GED, and they wanted to continue their education into like a vocational college class that was offered through the tech. They had the technical college in the area. Sent a couple of the teachers down, and they had welding, which I took, and they had small engines and a construction, like a carpentry class. When I signed up for the welding class, after that 1 year class, that was it. They cut the program. It kind of sucked, so I wasn't able to get the other two classes that they had previously offered done. But I was able to go and do a lot of work programs there. After I got done with my schooling, I ended up becoming a janitor for the school in the prison, which is one thing that I've noticed. In the juvenile prison, they paid us a whole lot better than they do in adult. When I started working, I was making 50 cents an hour, and I was working about 40 hours a week doing the janitor work. I would help out in the main laundry when they needed people, and I was doing garbage pickup around the whole institution. So every week I was making maybe 40 bucks a week. Then they ended up bumping up my pay to $1 an hour after a couple of years. So I was making substantially more. And another big thing that was different from adult and juvenile, our commissary, or we called it canteen, that we got every week. We could order our hygiene, our candy, our food. It was extremely limited on what we could order compared to the adult. We weren't able to get bar soap. It was always liquid soap. We didn't get a whole lot of like food items. We had mostly just chips and like candy. So we made do with it. We made a lot of meals out of the food that we had from canteen or commissary. But our ingredient list from commissary was not nearly as good as regular prisons. But from what I've heard from everybody is our food was a lot better. It was still shitty, but it was edible. And also one of the other main things that changed while I was there was actually they cut one of the best programs that they ever had there, and it was a boot camp that they had set up, and that was primarily for people that were getting released. It was set up to teach the inmates, or juveniles, they called them, youth, which I'll get into that in a minute. But that program was set up just like the military. Actually, most of the staff that organized it were former military, and it was set up with the same PT. It was same dress code, same drill and ceremony, same marching procedures. They tried to make it as close to the military as they could possibly do. We had a ropes course, an obstacle course, and a lot of times, 6 days a week, every one of our squads would go out, and we had 2-man saws, just one guy on each side, and you just cut wood for about an hour and a half a day. And that really helped show us discipline and gave us, I think, a stronger work performance. Being as I was already done with school when I went through that class, or that boot camp, I volunteered to be out there at the wood pile with every squad, so I was out there for about 4.5 to 5 hours a day, and I loved it. I grew up cutting wood ever since I was real little, so it made me feel like I was back at home. I liked it. Got some muscle doing it, and we were always having fun doing it. We were sitting there just bullshitting the whole time, or we split the wood with a maul, and we had one administrator that came down, and she didn't like that program because she felt that it was like a slave labor camp. So she cut that whole program, even though compared to any other program at that juvenile prison, it had the lowest recidivism rate. Typically, about 75 to 80% of guys that got released from there would come back. And they would typically come back very soon. Like within 3 to 6 months, they would be back. With that boot camp program, I think it dropped down to about 40% of people that passed that program would be back. So it actually was working, and they cut it. Then the other main difference that I've heard from every guy that's been to adult prison is the guards. The guards at adult prison, it's almost like it's reversed. At adult prison, you would find very few guards that actually gave a shit. Most of them were there just for the paycheck, and they were mostly dicks. And at the juvenile place, or at least the juvenile prison that I was at, which mine was kind of set up in the middle of Wisconsin, and it was set in the woods. It was actually a huge facility. But for us, it seemed like most of the guards actually were in the position to help us, and that's why they went into that profession, was to actually help us younger guys that were doing criminal activity, and there was a high chance of us getting out and committing more crimes and graduating to adult. That was a very real statistic. So it seemed like a lot of the guards that I dealt with, most of them, I'd say a good 85% of the guards that worked there actually gave a shit about us. Excuse me. There were, just like anywhere else, there is going to be the bad apples that were there for a power trip, that, wanted to be dicks. And a lot of times I think it was because when they were going to school, it was us kids that were picking on them or bullying them or something. And it was their way of getting back at us. That's how it felt. But it was significantly different than the adult system, where you might have 1 out of 50 guards that were actually a decent human being, from my understanding, from what I've talked to. And also, they would always be there for you after you got out, to kind of help you out. If you needed somebody to talk to, you could always call them up after you got out. You could even be off of probation, you could be an adult, call them up, and they were always willing to help you. Which, as far as I know, it never ever happens like that in the adult system. But as far as juvenile goes, I think that they did a really great job. Personally, I can only speak for myself. If I hadn't gone there and they hadn't gave all the effort that they did to help me and give me the tools to turn myself around and start living a better life, I can almost guarantee that I would have been an adult. But they gave me a lot of tools, and also with seeing all these guys that came back. I was there for 8 years, which in the juvenile system, that's a long time. I I was often called the grandpa of the institution. Um, I was the old man there. And people would often come to me after I had grown up and stopped being foolish in there. A lot of guys would come to me for advice. But being there for as long as I was, I had seen so many people that came back and heard about guys that left that, you know, graduated to the adult system, or I always called them doing life on the installment plan. They would get out for a couple months and then get another 2-year sentence, get out, come back with a 5-year sentence, and just keep going back. And after 8 years, there was absolutely no way I ever wanted to go back. As pretty as that razor wire fence was around the institution, you know, get up in the morning and the sun's gleaming off of it, and in the wintertime all the frost and ice would be hanging off of the razor wire. As pretty as it was, nope, I never want to see it again. And then also with the juvenile system, when I got out, they had, because I had been incarcerated for so long, and they were worried about me being institutionalized and not knowing how to function on the outs. They ended up setting me up with in a halfway home, or a group home. And this one was specifically set up for people that were on the juvenile system but were legally adults. I don't know how Wisconsin even does that, but we would get put on probation or incarcerated as juveniles. We would still be on juvenile probation, even though I was 23, 24 at the time. A couple other guys were 21, you know. So they wanted to have a group home that was, it was definitely less structured than what we had been used to, but it still had the guidelines, it still had rules, it still had staff members that were there constantly watching us. So it was like a step down process. So they weren't just throwing us out. And with all that money that I had saved up while I was in the juvenile prison, I had quite a bit of money saved up, but because of that group home, I wasn't able to touch most of it. All my funds, even when I was working, because that was one of the main things. Once you got there, your first couple days you were able to sit there, relax, watch TV, play the pool, you know, and do, like, just get acclimated to the change. But after that first couple days, you were on the computer looking for jobs, or you were outside pounding pavement, going at every business that you could walk to. And I had to walk pretty far, and it was winter, of course. So I was walking miles every day, 10 miles that way, picking up applications 10 miles that way, picking up applications. I mean, it was nuts. Get back, fill out all the applications, then walk back, drop them all off. And actually, I found a fairly good warehouse company that hired me on. They hired me as a overnight restocker, which I've always loved night shift. As you can tell, I'm at work right now and it's getting dark. Right now I'm working 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. But I've always loved night shift. And at that company they had a night shift differential, so you got paid. I think it was only like $1.50 or $2 more an hour for working overnights, but it was definitely worth it to me. So I worked at that company, and I was still at the group home. Then after a year of being in the group home, I was able to start looking for my own apartment. So I found a really cheap 1-bedroom apartment. It was actually a duplex. I had the upstairs room, and then we had the downstairs neighbor. But it was really cheap. I think it was like $350 a month for this little 1-bedroom apartment. And I'm not lying, my bedroom there was smaller than my cell in jail. I fit my bed down on the ground. I had about that much room between my bed and the wall that I could walk around. But what the hell? Most of the time I was at work anyway, so, and it was the cheapest thing I could find. So I had more money to spend on all my other budget items, like my food and anything else. But with all the money that I had made in that prison, that's the money that I ended up using to buy my first vehicle. Once you got to that part in your probation or in their group home, once you got to a certain level where you could get out, have your own apartment, you're still with the group home, they were still checking on you. You still had to do your weekly UAs, alcohol swabs, and all that stuff. You had to go in and check in every week, 2 times a week, whatever they told you to. But you were able to get an apartment, and you were able to get a car if you had the money, which I was lucky. I was making the most out of anybody in the group home. I worked the most hours. Anytime any overtime came up, I signed up right away. And I actually saved up quite a bit of money doing that. But that first truck that I bought, went over to the dealership. And I ended up getting a 2004 Ford Explorer. Actually, that was one of the better vehicles that I've had even since then. Really nice. It ran for many years after I got done. Um, but yep, up until the day that I got off of probation, like my birthday, every single week I was doing at least 1 or 2 UAs. And I know guys that are on, and girls that are on adult probation, that they'll go 6 months without ever seeing their PO. And the PO really doesn't give a shit what they're doing. So that's another big difference that I noticed. And this is just from what I can say, is that the juvenile system, they stay on your ass. They make sure you're actually staying clean, that you're not getting back to doing anything you shouldn't be. But so far I have been extremely lucky, and I have not ended up back in the system. And it's been really hard since getting out. I know for a fact I was extremely institutionalized, going in at 14, coming out at about 22, 23, and not being actually free until I was 25. Man, when I was actually free, yeah, it was a wild time. It was a whole lot of bad decisions when I actually got my freedom, but nothing criminal. It was just, hey, now I can actually go to the bar, I can drink. You know, ever since I was real young, I had grown up in the bars. I was a huge alcoholic by the time I was 14. And I ended up going back to the bars. It wasn't anything too bad. I would just get super drunk, but I was always having fun most of the time. I wasn't causing any problems, nothing illegal, but I just wasn't very smart. Got out, just blew a whole lot of money on shit that I didn't need. Just getting that sudden burst of freedom. If I had been a little bit smarter, I could have done it a whole lot better. But that was nothing to do with the system. That was nothing to do with the prison. That was nothing to do with the PO. That was all on me. I got that freedom, and it was like a kid in a candy store. But ever since then, I've always made it a point to actually stay out, to stay away from the drugs. And I used to love fighting. Well, I ended up getting quite a few jobs that actually paid me to fight. Not technically, but I was a bouncer in a small town strip club. One of the favorite jobs that I ever had. Got a lot of fun stories about that. think I had some of my favorite fights in there. Some big old bar brawls. I got bloodied up a little bit, and I loved it. It was just fun. It was all that adrenaline that I couldn't get from most legal activities. And it was a rush. It was fun. And I worked with some really great guys doing it. And actually, quite a bit of the factories and the manual labor jobs that I've done, I've met a lot of guys that grew up kind of like me. Either they were in juvenile for extended periods of time, or they were in prison for extended periods of time. And some of those guys that come out of prison, come out of juvie, you'll find out that a lot of the felons that are out here that actually turn their life around, they are the coolest guys you will ever meet. And they will give you the shirt off their back. But you do not want to cross them. If they have made a life choice not to go back to prison, and you end up fucking with that guy to the point where he actually says, fuck it, it's worth going back to prison, that man will make it worth the time. I have seen a lot of guys that will fuck with somebody that they know nothing about, and they won't know their past. And they'll just randomly start fucking with somebody, not knowing if that motherfucker snaps, they will fuck you up. And if they're going back to prison, they're gonna make it worth every fucking lick. But for the most part, all the guys that I've ever met that have been felons working at any of the jobs that I've worked at are the coolest people in the world, and they are like the nicest, and they're the funniest. Them motherfuckers got some nice stories if you ever want to hear about them. Like, just crazy shit. I've got some crazy stories about when I was in. None of them come close to some of these guys. But if you guys like this video, or if any of the guys that do the reaction channels, like Lockdown 23 and 1, who was it? Larry Lawton. He's one of the best ones that I see. That man went through a lot of prisons, and he has a lot of experience. He's a really good YouTuber. And the After Prison Show, he's another really good one. I think it would be really fun to sit down with some of those guys and just swap stories, go back and forth, like the pros and the cons between adult and juvenile. We weren't able to smoke in our juvenile, so if we had one of these smuggled in, this right here was worth about $10 on commissary. And that was before you gave them one of these. This was an extra $5 to use it. We had our hustles to a certain extent. Nowhere near what the adults had going. We weren't doing a whole lot of tattooing because they had it marked down exactly what what tattoos you had when you came in, and if they went back and checked you, say during a shakedown, and they noticed new ink, you were in the hole for about 2-3 months, depending on um, how many offenses you had. Sometimes it could only be a month. So we really didn't do a whole lot of that. So the biggest industry that we really had was tobacco. Some guys would bring cigarettes in. Some guards would sell us cigarettes. So we had our dirty guards too. And then chewing tobacco was really big. And if you want to know how we got that in, you can always look at Larry Lawton's video on the suitcase. That's how we got that in, and you didn't want to think about it too much when guys brought that in. But yeah, I mean, we didn't have a whole lot of hustles, nowhere near as many as adult, but we made do. Some guys were doing drawings, kind of like the guy from the After Prison show. He would sell his drawings, usually for like cards for their kids, parents, whatever. Or smuggling food from the cafeteria. That was really big. And also, we weren't allowed any nude magazines. So, if you had one of the guards or somebody bring in you like a hustler, just that book, you might buy it from him, from a guard, for about $15. You were sitting on a gold mine if you had that whole magazine. Just cut out every single picture. Each one of those pictures was worth about 15. Sometimes, depending on the picture, the quality could be down to $5-10. And it also depended on how much of those jerk-off pics, JPs, were floating around. If everybody was dry, you could get $15 easy for a picture of, some chick's tit. That was a real big hustle too, and hooch was a big one. A lot of guys made that up at the cafeteria, hid it up there, brought it back when it was done, and they'd sell a couple bottles of that for quite a bit of money, and then we'd celebrate. But if anybody wants to see these any more of these differences, I could probably do a couple more videos, maybe give some more of my life experiences behind the juvenile offense, kind of go more in depth how everything was there, or if any of those adult prison channels want to, give me a call, I'd sit down and swap stories with them. I mean, I'm up for it. I got no problem talking about it. And I've got no problem admitting that juvenile prison, that wasn't shit compared to the adult. We weren't worried too much about getting shanked. We had a lot of fights. That was about it. and a lot of those fights were guys couldn't fight. They had no business trying to fight. Um, but I mean, it was an experience. And the only thing I can talk about is what I seen when I was in. I can't talk about what juvenile prison was like, out in California, because I was never there. Just Wisconsin, just the one that I was in. That's the only experience that I'm going to talk about. And also, another thing that I would like to talk about is I'd like to sit down with maybe one of my friends. She did quite a bit of time in a female prison, and there's a lot of differences in there. And I'd like to sit and talk with her about the differences between, adult, juvenile, and adult female prisons, because they're all different. They're all extremely different. So if I can talk to a couple of my buddies and maybe the three of us can sit down, I'll be representing the juvenile side, and they'll be representing the adult and the adult female side. I think that would be really cool. And if anybody has any questions, put them down in the comments, and if I get enough feedback from it, I will gladly do another video and answer just about any of these questions. I think that would be really cool. And it might change a lot of people's opinions. I did a previous video on where I was locked up at. That was for a whole nother reason, though. If you want, you can go watch that. But I guess that's all I got for today. Comment, like. Let me know if you guys want any more videos like this. And if anybody knows those three channels that I watch, put a bug in their ear. Try sharing this video with them and see if we can do a sit down or a phone conference, whatever. I think that would be actually really cool to, go back and forth between the differences, or they'll tell me something like, yeah, we did similar over there. But I'll catch you guys later.